So please think about them, add them to the chat, and welcome. Many of you are already doing what I hope you would do. Please drop in the chat where you are calling in from. We've got folks from around the globe. Today, we have a very exciting topic. We are meeting with Melanie Bell-Mayeda. She is the Director of UX Program and Operations for SearchUX at Google. She's also a former IDEO partner. And I'm Colita Stafford, your host for today. Welcome, Mel.
Hi, so good to be here. So good to be with you.
Again, because I'll give a proper intro in a moment. Mel has been on many times. For those of you who may be tuning into the Creative Confidence podcast for the first time, I just want to share a little info. We're IDEOU, an online school from design and innovation firm IDEO. We help leaders take on any challenge by putting people first. So our online courses give you the skills and confidence to lead creative and collaborative teams and to design strategies, products, and services grounded in human needs. Today's episode, we're going to be discussing a big topic, leading in times of chaos. Mel is going to cover things like how to create conditions for your team to work amidst uncertainty, tips for taking a human-centered approach to change leadership, and 3 levers to change change that we can prioritize in times of chaos. Simple topics, Mel. I really love that you picked this.
Exactly. And I feel like now more than ever, it's not a simple one, obviously, but now more than ever, just talking about this and sharing kind of the tips, the tools, the tricks across all of us that are really trying to lead teams effectively in this moment just feels so relevant.
So relevant. So let's go there. Let's set some context. Like change management is an entire field. It's a big topic because organizations are constantly faced with new norms and disruptions. Some of the current ones that some of you may face are hybrid ways of working. Some organizations are thinking about how do I integrate generative AI. There's no rule book for organizations on how to do this. Like you said, there are a lot of strategies and frameworks and approaches, though. Um, it is a skill all modern teams, all modern leaders need. So, Mel, can you tell us a bit about what do we mean by leading in times of chaos or disruption, and how is that different from other types of change management or change leadership?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of the things that we are thinking about and talking about today is like there's change that you initiate as a leader, as a team leader, as a manager, where it's like you conceive of a new idea or a new opportunity given your organizational goals and strategies, and then you start to work that through your team and your organization. So there's a little bit more control, a feeling of control in that. The other
Mm.
side of the coin, however, is when there are market factors, social conditions that are changing around you and are actually kind of the factors and the forces that are driving you to change. And in this moment, it's honestly both, right? And so that's where the chaos comes in because as an organization, you're trying to meet this moment, meet your user needs, set your teams up for success, give them some clarity. But then at the same time, you're also dealing with technological change that is coming at a faster pace than ever. And especially at Google, like AI, a huge topic, right? That is finally hitting the market with like real and like changing the nature of how people
Yeah,
interact with
yeah.
technology. And then, you can look around the world, like your city may have new dynamics. We're watching, every administration change actually brings with it new dynamics, and we're watching a lot of that unfold right now. And so it's like there's a high level of signal and a high level of noise happening at
Oh,
the same time.
I
And
love
so
that.
how do you as a manager start to think about what do I take from this moment and still give my team the clarity they need to move forward?
I love that. I love the signal to noise ratio too. I've heard you talk also about, I know you value highly about how do you create clarity and calm, and also how do you think about, these conditions can create decision paralysis or confusion. So we're going to talk a little bit too about how you think about structures, because those are natural emotional feelings that come out of these conditions. So,
100%.
right. So as a warm up, we of course would love to hear from you in the audience and anyone listening. Um, We can imagine many of you may be struggling or can relate to some of these things. So if you could, please share in the chat, what is a challenge, a change challenge that you face, particularly one that may be external or beyond kind of your control? And as you are writing those in, Mel, I'm going to give you a chance to look at some of these. I'd love
Okay.
to do a proper introduction. Again, we are joined today by Melanie Bell-Mayeda. She's the Director of UX Program and Operations for SearchUX at Google. She's a former IDEO partner who led the Systems for Change practice and worked with a wide range of Fortune 500 organizations. Previous experience includes Leapfrog, Virgin Entertainment, Bose Allen and Hamilton, and Morgan Stanley. As I mentioned, she's also an IDOU instructor of our human-centered service design course and a frequent podcast guest. She's previously been on to talk about 3 ways to design better service experiences and how to tackle your journey map roadblocks. I just want to add too, personally, Mel, I've had the privilege of working with you a number of times, and one of the reasons why I know you are so valuable to so many audiences is you have a beautiful blend of business acumen and technical expertise with human-centeredness and storytelling, and you lead with humanity. I have seen you hip hop dance in front of an entire room of executives. So that just gives you a taste of Mel, and we're so happy you joined us again. Okay, with that, Mel, do you want to see, like, what are some of the themes we're seeing? Do any of these, are these any you relate to?
I mean, so many. And it's so interesting to actually watch the chat fill with them because it's like, it's twofold, right? It's like the nature of the changes, and it's just like how many things are coming at each of us as a manager every single day,
Every
right?
day.
Like I can imagine everyone starts in front of their desk or their computer and just like takes a deep breath before they get started. But a few of the things I'm seeing, a lot of things around the executive orders, which I
Mm,
know are causing a
mhm.
lot of chaos and confusion right now. What do you act upon? What do you not act upon?
Yep.
I'm seeing a lot of things about organizations either spinning up completely new entities or features or products, and some being spun off, and
Yeah.
having to understand how they live outside of an organization. A lot of things around regulatory issues and how do you think about kind of building products in like a shifting landscape of what will be permitted or not permitted as you launch those, and a lot of questions around reorganization.
Yeah.
And that's especially true for mid-sized to larger sized organizations are constantly reorganizing to fit their teams to the work ahead. But as we know, any reorg also takes a lot of time, attention, and adjustment, right? So you're trying to navigate through that. So those are definitely a few of the themes I'm seeing in here that are resonating.
Thank you. And it is amazing how many responses we just got to that. There's well over 100. So
Yeah.
so let's talk about how can we navigate some of this? What can we do? So Mel, you've grounded our talk today in a framework, and I'll start by introducing it, and then we're going to go into examples of how we can use this in our context to better manage disruption. So the framework we're going to introduce is called the STAR model. It is an ideal iteration of a common one by Jay Galbraith, the original STAR model. We've adapted it to emphasize human centeredness, but it has many similarities. So just going to describe it at a high level for those of you listening only. There are 6 nodes in this star, and I'm going to go through them. Think of these are different areas you can identify points of friction in an org. They are likely the areas that will need some attention, and they're also the area where it's an opportunity for you to implement some design choices. So the 6 levers or the 6 nodes are strategy. This is all about aligning the group. Structure. This is defining where authority resides. Process, how you direct the flow of work. Infrastructure, all about behaviors and resources. Talent is about the skills and mindsets of your people. And then incentives, how do we motivate people? So Mel, I understand there are at least 3 that we're going to focus on today. But first, what do you like about this framework? How do you apply it in times of chaos?
Yeah. I mean, what I love about this is, there's kind of like the abstract hope for change, like what you want to produce for your team, the platform you want to create for your team. But these are things that you can actually design, right? So you can it starts to break it down in ways that make it really addressable. And as a manager, that's really important, right? Because it's like that hope to action is a key part. Um, in addition, any single lever is important, but the levers actually work together, right? And
Mm,
so it's another reminder that as you zoom out and you think about, well, when I think about what my team needs right now or what we need to deliver right now, which of these levers individually and together give us the best opportunity to help our team to do its best work? Now, one acknowledgement is that depending on where you sit in the organization or the amount of dynamic chaos that's happening, you may not have control over some of these. Like you might not have control over strategy because strategy can be set at a very high level.
mhm.
Um, but again, what this model lets you do is translate that into what you can control. So, for example, you might not be able to control like the overall strategy of being, growing by X percent, per year as an organization, but you can take that down into a level of clarity for your team. So, for example, um, if you think about, a new product that has to be out in market within the next 12 months, your team might be doing one piece of the feature, and you can get really specific about how your team is delivering on that overarching strategy to deliver that whole new product that's meant to be out in market in a year plus. Um, did you want me to dive into the ones that I'm most focused on right
I
now
would
as
love
well?
for you to dive into the ones you care most about or you would recommend that we should look at if we don't know where to start.
Absolutely. So my favorite ones, I am a strategist at heart. I love strategy. Process is the second one. And then people and talent are the third. And so the reason that I pick these really has to do with the fact that, oh, sorry, did I? No. The reason I pick these is that strategy provides clarity. People need to understand, no matter what level of the organization that they're working in, how their work ladders up to that strategy. Why that's important? People want to feel like they're working on important things. They
Yeah.
want to feel like their work matters and is meaningful. And they also want to feel like it will be recognized in the context of the overall organization. I saw a lot of people in the chat talking about reorgs. And just being totally honest, it's like sometimes reorgs mean that the musical chairs don't leave a seat for everyone. And so having people understand that their work is tied to the strategic priorities of the organization helps give them some comfort and confidence that they're working on the right things, because
Yeah.
ultimately that's what everyone wants.
What if, Mel, instead of just going through all three, let's just take a moment on each. Let's go deep in
Yeah.
strategy to start, and then we'll get to process and talent. And I love, we've had previous guests on, and Roger Martin, Jennifer Riel, talking about strategy, and it's really about the choices. What are the choices we are saying yes to? What are we saying no to?
Hmm.
So for
Hmm.
you, Mel, what does it mean to take a human-centered approach to strategy, especially in dynamic or chaotic times?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's about holding both kind of the aspiration of what you're trying to accomplish, but also making it really actionable, right? Because I think when you think about people and being human centered in that way, if there's an aspiration with no roadmap, it makes people feel really unsettled and unable to actually take action, right? So that's
Yeah.
definitely one piece. Um, the second piece is that when you're communicating the strategy to folks, um, you're really breaking it down into ways that like it matters for your end user, right? Because it's like, it's not just about producing a new product, for example. It's like what that product actually means for people and why I care, why we should all care about doing that. So, I get to work on a product like Search, which just is an
Right.
unbelievable opportunity. And at the end of every year, we do a year in search. And while we're all deep in like the day-to-day working of like how that strategy translates into like a new way to access the search bar, at the end of the day, what we're doing is making sure that a mom who's trying to find the best medical treatment for her child can do that through the search bar. We're trying to make sure that someone who may have vision impairment and not be able to see the search bar in a certain way has a way to access search and that information in the most robust and easy way that they possibly can. So again, like strategy is about straddling that, like not just what you're trying to accomplish, but why you're trying to accomplish it and why it matters. And that's what motivates people to do the work that they do.
Love that. That's so beautiful. I know too, I've heard you say how important it is that that strategy be actionable and relatable at all levels of the org. What does that mean?
Yeah, it is because often when you see like a 3 to 5 year strategy written,
Hmm.
it can be very broad. So one example that I'll use is I am on the board of directors for an organization called Samuel Merritt University.
Okay.
It's a health sciences university based in Oakland. I love it. It does all of the non-MD degrees, so nurses, physical therapists, occupational therapists. So it's just a wonderful. I feel so lucky to be able to do that work. When I say making a strategy tangible inside an organization, like the overall mission and strategy of Samuel Merritt is to be the premier health sciences university supporting community development of health sciences professionals. Now, if I sit in finance, for example, what does that mean? Right?
Mm.
Like what am I supposed to do? Right? Like, and as the team leader of finance,
Yeah.
they're like, well, like, how do I help you understand what that means? Um, so in this case, for example, one of the things about being a premier university is attracting new students. So it's attracting students to the best possible programs that we can deliver. So as a board, we decided to actually invest in a new building in Oakland. So if anyone is in the Bay Area, you can come by and see it. It's actually being built right now. Um, so what that meant for the team was like, okay, this new building is like a huge commitment. So the finance team had to do things like model out the revenue and the performance that we needed. The finance team had to translate our investment in the space into what would make sense on an annual, a quarterly basis in terms of our projections of revenue and expenses. They would also have to figure out things like how do we outfit these spaces to create the best possible classroom training experiences? So, what are the CapEx investments we need to make? What are kind of the outfitting, like how do we infuse technology into those spaces? So, that's just a way of saying, like, you take this like premier health sciences university, you take the next level of strategy, which is investing in a new building to make that happen. And then you take it down to your team level and say, okay, there are a whole series of work streams that we need to do that actually enable those pieces of the strategy to manifest.
To manifest. And so I love that example. Thank you. And it does feel big still, of course, and it is. So
Right,
last
right,
question
right.
on strategy. Do you have some practical small tips that any leader might try this week even to make strategy more human-centered for their teams?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think probably what I do and
Mhm.
didn't necessarily do great in that example is if I can explain it in 30 seconds or less, and someone actually understands it and understands what they're then meant to do, then it's really clear.
I
So
love
maybe let
that.
me give a quick example on that, if that's okay.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
Um, so in my current role, one of the things I do is look across all of the programs, right? Because you can imagine we're developing any number of products and features at any given point in time.
Hmm.
Um, I will have a specific question that I'm trying to answer, which is around like where are there opportunities for some of these programs to overlap? So I will translate that big question of like, how
Hmm.
do we take all of these programs and understand where there are opportunities for overlap and get into a very specific question for someone on my team and say, I
Ah,
would love for you to be able to show me on a half yearly basis where our programs overlap and what the implications are so that we can help our leads make better decisions.
That's beautiful. That's a great
Right. So
example.
like it just, you're trying to
Mm,
take it down to
mhm,
its like pinpoint so that someone
mhm,
knows what to do, but then they see where
mhm.
the implication of that work
How
will
it
actually
ladders back
ladder us
up.
up.
Oh, that's a great example. I've also heard you talk about learning agendas, which is around what's something we might test and iterate on, which is a great mechanism for managing strategy and activating strategy because there is so much learning that needs to happen. And when it's like it's a human-centered approach. It's not just you do have to deliver on the OKRs that are outlined, but sometimes those stepping stones of what are we trying to learn can activate momentum. Anything you want to add on the learning agenda theme?
Yeah, on the learning agenda, right? Because I think to your what you're highlighting, Co, is that
Mhm.
strategy isn't static. Like there's not one
No.
way to get there,
Yeah.
right?
Hmm.
And we're, as we were talking about in the beginning around dynamic times, chaotic times, as I was seeing in the chat, you might have a strategy and then you might be in the middle of a reorg, right? So now what do you do? So what that learning agenda helps you to do is to build in progress points that you can measure, right? So you want to say
That's
like, okay, if we're trying to get to X point, how do I understand how do I break that down into maybe what I can do and learn this quarter, whether it's like from
Mhm.
a product development standpoint, a testing standpoint, a research standpoint, and that will tell me more of if I'm on the right track to keep moving
Love that.
toward the strategy with this particular work, or if I need to pivot and adjust, but still toward that North Star, right?
Yeah. I love that. Thank you. And so I know we could do an entire episode. We can do several months worth on just strategy. We're going to move on to process, but I do want to just, for those of you, we've heard from many of you in our community, strategy to action is a big challenge, and there is a craft to it. We do have an entire course on it, and it is a deep dive into a lot of ways that you can make strategy actionable. So it includes things like how you map and connect with stakeholders, how you can design engagement moments across the org, how you can like what Mel was talking about. How do you prototype choices and maybe break it down by quarter or kind of micro milestones to build confidence? So I do encourage you to check that out. But first, Mel, let's go to your second lever, process. So, why is process a critical lever in times of change? And what does a human-centered approach look like?
Yeah, absolutely. I think when everything is changing around you, you basically need something to hold on to. You need something that feels clear and predictable in your world. And often process is that thing, right? Because so many teams can waste time, energy, and spinning when they're trying to identify not just what to do, but how to do it. So that's where process plays a role. Process also creates momentum, right? Because it's like you create a plan for how do we get from, this point and this strategy in the next 8 to 10 weeks. Like what do we expect to see? What are the
Mhm.
milestones in there? And it really, those markers help people to understand what they should be working toward, right? And where the
Yeah.
feedback loops will exist in that context. And so again, it allows them to understand it's like, hey, how do I take this work and break it down into its addressable parts and know when and how I'm going to make progress against that, and when and how I'm going to interact with my team around that progress.
That was beautiful, by the way. That I'm just going to pause for a moment. How do you take something, break it down? What does progress look like? How are you going to assess it? How are you going to communicate with your team? So just that alone, I just wanted to pause and acknowledge how accessible that is. But it is a skill. It is a skill.
It is a skill. It is a skill. I mean, as a team leader, I think there are two things I think about. It's around creating that clarity,
Hmm.
right? Around
Hmm.
where we're headed and what we're doing. But it's also being transparent and authentic about what I don't know,
Mm.
right? And so again, and this is where process comes into play, because sometimes it can be, for the next 4 weeks, we're going to prototype something, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's like, here's the answer I want to get to. So for the next 4 weeks, we're going to prototype this piece of it so that we can understand, and I can better understand what the right answer might be, right? So people can see the use in their work. Sometimes the process can be as short as like a day or even 30 minutes, right? And
Oh, I love that. Yeah. Okay.
yeah, because you don't want people to spin on things. It's like, it's just enough information, just enough activity for you to make your best next step,
Mm-hmm.
right? And that's part of what process helps you do. But it is an art. And there is, I think, is like, looking across a lot of the folks in the chat, like, regardless of what level you sit in the organization, it really is about creating the platform for the team to do great work, putting controls in where you can control them, right? So at some level, you control the process, which is why I love
Even if
this
you
one
just
note.
even if you just control one meeting is a
A
place you
hundred
can,
percent.
yeah. Mm-hmm.
100%. And even as an individual contributor, right? You control, like, you can lay out for yourself that schedule of like, hey, how do I break this down into a piece that I can like learn about, understand, and be able to provide valuable information and direction?
So Mel, do you have an example? Do you have any tips, practical ways people can improve process in a human-centered way and a real world example?
Yeah, absolutely. Um, so thinking about some of the principles, and then I'll go into the example. It's like, it's really great, ideally, if you can co-design the process with your
Mm-hmm.
team, um, to kind of you might, as the leader, it's always great to take a first pass at it and lay it out, but to get their input and feedback. So one, that they understand the principles behind why this process is in place through that dialogue. And also they may see things you don't see.
Mm-hmm.
And you want the process to be improved based on their expertise, and based on what they're seeing in their particular work streams. Um, you also want to make sure that you're making the workflows intuitive and
Mm.
adaptable. And what I mean by that is each step should make sense, right? If someone's scratching their head of like, I have no idea why we're going in this direction, it's probably good to take it back and take another pass at it, right? Because that the flow should actually feel really natural in terms of the development, the decision making, and driving to those outcomes. Um, Another key part is building in fast feedback loops, because you don't want to like go away and do your work in a corner and then reveal this outcome and find out
It
you might
wasn't
have
even the
missed the mark.
direction you should have been going
And it
in.
wasn't exactly worst case scenario. It wasn't even what you should have been doing in the first place. So kind of how are you building that in? Um, so a real world example I'll share is design reviews on my team, right? Is launching. So you can imagine I sit in the UX organization. There are a lot of products that we're designing at any given point in time. There are all just different stages of development. We have to engage not just our UX leadership, but also our cross-functional leadership, right? So
Mm-hmm.
here, the process is really, really important because you want to strike the right balance of getting the right work in front of the right people at the right times, but not getting overwhelmed by feedback at the stages where it might not be as helpful, and also giving teams enough time to do their work. Um, so in this case, it's twofold. One is we absolutely outline a process document, a strategic roadmap, or a roadmap, a development roadmap.
Yep.
And those are often based on what we call playbooks. And those playbooks are kind of the ways that we've almost started to standardize the way that we run the process. And why that's important is because the more you follow a process again and again, the easier it is for people. You start to reduce the cognitive load of the process because everyone starts to know what to expect, right? So it's like you want to design the process and you also want to design the playbook so that you can repeat that process over and over so that the things that work, you go back to them again and again. Another piece of the process, which is really, really fascinating, going back to feedback loops, um, is inserting them at times where you know the team can act on them, but you also know you can still make your deliverable dates,
Yeah. That
right?
sounds important.
And that's actually really hard to do,
To
right? And so,
choreograph. Hmm.
yes, absolutely, because
Hmm.
you want the best possible product to
Hmm.
go out into market. But
Hmm.
sometimes you hit those marks where the feedback is more significant than you anticipated. And so, two things to think about. One is like, how are you setting up those feedback loops for
Hmm.
success? So, introducing them again early and often at the right times with the right cadence. And the second is making sure that the process can actually adapt as you're going, right? So if you do get feedback that feels like, wow, we need to
We
address
need to.
that. And
Hmm.
yeah, it's like we might need to rethink the remaining process in order to make our deadline. And that can include like, how do you adjust team size? How do you adjust, future deliverables? How do you um, parallel different parts of the process in order to get to dates?
Love it. You do make it sound so easy. Do you have any, can you just like role play for me? What is a way, a sentence or kind of a way that you address that in your team when you recognize we're not going to make this, we need to address this bigger thing? I'm just curious, are there things, how do you show up in that? How do you say that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, again, getting back to that deep breath, you pull the team back together and you
Yeah.
take a step back and you say, one, do we agree and identify that the feedback is valid, right? And this level of change is needed. Um, two, is there a way for us to get from here to there on the timelines that we articulated, right? It's like almost you kind of blank slate, like erase that section of the process timeline and say, what would it take
Mm,
for us to get from here to there, right? And that's when you start to solicit, like, do we need more team members? Do we need, are there things that can backseat in terms of this particular product or feature in order to put at the forefront this particular change?
that's
The
great.
third thing you want to do is say, how could we have gotten this information sooner?
Mm, hmm.
Right. And so then you're taking a step back, and that's an evaluative moment of like,
Hmm.
are there things we should have shown earlier? Did information change? Right. And was that the trigger? So you really want to be able to
Learn from it
analyze and learn
and
from
learn
it
from
so
it.
that,
Yeah. Okay.
and in the
Yep.
future, was this a one-time thing, or is this something we can fix with the existing process? Or, is there something else we should consider so that we're better at it next time?
Yeah. Thank you for that, Mel. I'm going to keep us moving just so we can make
Yes.
time for questions as well. And there's a third one we want to go through. So let's talk about people. Why is, what is a human-centered design to or human-centered approach to people needs in times of change? What does that look like? Why is that important?
Yeah, it is, because I think when you're in an uncertain time,
Hmm.
which changes, people feel high levels of stress. It's a very emotional time for your
Hmm.
team. And I think as a leader, you have to acknowledge that, and you have to sort of take that head on. Um, and you at the end of the day, you want to give them as much stability and support as you can, and also recognize kind of when they're ready to pivot from that stress state into the productive state, right? But you can't
Mm.
necessarily push them into that, but that's something that you're reading for, as a team lead. The things that you can control, right? So that's at the individual level where you're kind of getting a read on your team. The things that you can control is, in the context of this new change, how do you best match your talent to the opportunities that are ahead? So you
Yeah.
might shift people across your team because you're like, hey, this is a moment where you leaning into this particular part of the program is both an amazing opportunity for you and amazing opportunity for the program. I also want to underscore being explicit about why you're matching someone to an opportunity is a huge
Mm.
plus.
Hmm.
Everyone wants to feel seen and valued, right? So just even articulating, here's why I picked you. Here's why I'm asking you to do this particular thing. Your skill set applies to this in these ways. It really helps someone to lean into that
Love
space.
it.
It isn't something that they're excited to do, right?
Yep. Yep.
I think the second thing that you want to do is invest in your team growth and their well-being, right?
Mhm.
So every opportunity that you put in front of a team member, it's like you sort of want to be thinking about that arc of like, what does this help
Mhm.
them do next? What does
Mhm.
this help them get better at? What's within their specific like opportunity set? Like, do they want a promotion? Do they want to shift to a new kind of product area or new kind of skill set? And how is this opportunity, like, how am I also serving that up, both within the work that we have to do or through training or outside pieces of the work? Um, and you also finally want to foster a culture of belonging and well-being. And this is especially important when you're in a chaotic time,
Yep.
is allowing teams to feel voice what they're feeling, and to accept that and to, be able to identify, are there to hear it, and then to see if there's solutions you can actually provide. You want psychologically safe spaces where people can say hard things, right? Because you get better by being able to voice those things and move them forward.
Mhm.
And you want to be able to have a dialogue across the team where not everyone necessarily has the same point of view.
Yeah.
Um,
Thank you for acknowledging that. I think a lot of teams sense that, and it's not always normalized or brought into the conversation. So,
mhm, mhm.
yeah. Can you give us, just to keep us moving, can you give us an example of a way you support your teams at Google?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'll give one quick one and then one slightly longer one. So, one quick one, at my last all team,
Mhm.
um, I put up a picture of a low country beach where there were a host of starfish. So if anyone's gone to like the Georgia area, the South Carolina area, and if you're on the beach at sunrise, you'll notice a whole host of starfish that haven't made it back into the sea. Um, and it's a sad moment, but it's also a life cycle
Yeah,
moment.
yeah.
And as the story goes, there's a little girl who's walking across the beach and throwing one starfish at a time back into the water.
Mm,
And
mm,
an adult stops her and says, "Well, why are
mhm.
you doing that? You can't save them all." And she says, "Well, I saved that one." And so that was how I started the meeting. And I was like, "What is your starfish?" Right. And
Mm.
when you're in these moments of tension with people, ask them what their starfish is.
Love
Because
that. Yeah.
at the end of the day, everyone has a place that they value and that they want to be helpful. And that I feel like is common ground. A second, and I'll make it a short example too, is I kicked off a Craftworks program for my team this year, which is really about us. Like, we did a survey at the end of last year, understanding like what people wanted to learn and how they wanted to learn, and so launched it this year. Really thinking about everything from how do we as a team talk about our craft and dive into practical and pragmatic approaches that are shared across us
Yeah.
that help us to do our work better.
Yeah.
And then I love a good analog. And so one of the other things we're doing is bringing in a Michelin starred chef to talk to the team. And my team does programs and
Uh-huh.
operations, which is our role is
Mm,
to create calm and clarity and beauty in chaos. And
mm.
so a chef thinks about front of house and back of house. There's chaos in the back of house. There are ingredient mixtures. There's a frenetic pace of things happening. There's expertise, um, and then all in service of delivering this beautiful at table experience that happens. And so he will
That's
be joining
beautiful.
us in a few weeks, and my hope is that the team kind of feels you know some of the joy and some of the inspiration too around our craft, even in the midst of it being so chaotic.
I love that. Those are great examples. Thank you, Mel. I want to pause where we are and we're going to get ready to take a couple questions. We've covered a lot. We have time for two, and I've got two great ones teed up, Mel. But first, let me just cover again. We're talking with Melanie Bell-Mayeda. We've been talking about STAR framework and three levers that you can design around, especially in times of disruption. So we've talked about strategy, which is all about clarity. It helps keeps teams aligned in times of uncertainty, and the big theme there was aspirational yet actionable. We talked about process. This is all about how you enable conditions for execution, and how turning strategy into action in ways that teams at multiple levels of the org and in multiple disciplines can contribute meaningfully. And then, of course, people. And Mel, I really appreciate you. You focused really on the engagement and unlocking the potential in folks, creating conditions for safety, because it is a highly stressful moment. So, a question for the audience is: think about what of these levers needs your attention right now. What is your starfish? I think that's a great one. And is there one idea from today's conversation that you could test out this week or just have a conversation with a colleague about? So, as you think of that, Mel, I have two questions. One is juicy. It's so good. This comes from
Mm,
Richard.
okay.
Um, and this is, I'm gonna, it's the big idea of sometimes there's a strategy and then happens that kind of points to that strategy might not be the right one. And so you still have to activate and keep the organization and the teams moving while you're still figuring out what might need to shift in our strategy. Is there a way, how do you think about keeping the group engaged when there's still a work in progress strategy?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Such a good question and such a hard one. What I often do is try to understand, do I have a directional sense of where the strategy might be headed?
Okay.
Um, the flip side of that is, do I know what for sure is no longer part of the strategy based on new information? Right. So it's
Mm,
like I try and address those two parts. Then I look at the work streams and identify, okay, of the work streams that we have,
mhm,
if I have a notional sense of where we're heading, how do I get um, how do I compartmentalize the work that's happening to make sure that it is still relevant in the context of that new notional strategy, right? So that
that's
the work they're
great.
doing is really
Yeah.
still directed in that space. If there are things that I know that we're not doing, it's being really clear and transparent that those work streams, it's like, how are we wrapping up, taking what we learned from
Hmm.
those, being able to distill those in a way that fuel other work, right? Because often part of why the strategy is Xing those out is because we learned something really important. And then giving that part of the team some certainty that it's like, here's how, as we start to identify the new, here's how I can imagine starting to pull you in. Another piece of it is, if at all possible, are timelines, right? So it's like, in the next 4 weeks, here's what we'll know. Or in the next 6 weeks, here's what we'll know. Because often people will spin because you can't have two variables moving at the same time. You can't
Hmm.
have an abstraction of strategy and no time horizon for when that strategy will be landed, right? So you need to give them one of those tent poles. And often, as a manager and a leader, you can give them a tent pole of like, it might not be 100% of the new strategy, but I can give you some lines about when you'll start to hear about what's coming next.
That's great. That's so helpful and tangible. And someone's saying too, like, so appreciate this podcast. Great takeaways, which Mel, I know is what you wanted from this. Okay, I have one more question, and then unfortunately, we're gonna have to wrap. This comes from a Poe. Pardon me if I'm saying the name incorrectly. In times of stress, no easily becomes a standard answer. How do you move to a yes and culture in times of high stress?
Oh, that is such a fantastic question. I think one of the things that comes to mind is, if you're saying no to something, what are you saying yes to?
Okay.
Right. And so I think that that's a clear way to get, either if you're trying to get it from leadership or give it to your team. It's like, I'm saying no to this in service of us having more time, creativity, attention to give to that. Right. And so that might not be exactly a yes and, but it does force, if there isn't a clear set of yeses, then you're like, well, then why are we saying no?
Mm-hmm.
Right. and
Mm-hmm.
and should we dedicate some time and attention to, like, gosh, where is the right place? What are those yeses we should be doubling down on, committing ourselves to? And even that shift in conversation
Yeah.
is really helpful.
Yeah. I'm going to add to that. One of the best questions from our another frequent podcast, Roger Martin, talking about strategy. Ask the question, what would have to be true for this to be a
Mhm.
yes? So it's just enough to shift the mindset in the conversation to be into a generative space and understand what the barriers are, why that no exists. So,
Right.
yeah. Mel, I'm so sorry. We have so many questions we can't get to. Actually, I'm sorry to the audience. Mel will send you all these questions, and these can be the start of your written series because there are some there are so many good ones. So I am going to start to wrap us up. Um, Before our final question, I just want to share some personal news. So, this is my last episode as a host, and we're going to take a moment to celebrate. Not to worry, the podcast is continuing. We have some great things in store, including a new host. But I want to celebrate. So, alongside our original host, Suzanne Gibbs Howard, we've interviewed nearly 150 leaders to date on this podcast. And the thing I have cherished most, besides Mel, amazing guests like you, is the audience, all of you around the globe. I have just cherished seeing like our chat is it fires up every time. There are so many of you around the globe who are making creative change happen in your communities, in your orgs. There's so many vibrant change leaders. And so I just want to celebrate all of the creative problem solvers, all the mischief makers out there. Yeah, I love seeing the way you share ideas and connect. So it's time for my next adventure. I'm going to be forever grateful to have been on this podcast. You can still keep up with me on LinkedIn, and you can still learn with me in Insights for Innovation. And I'm going to move on to my next chapter. But stay tuned. The team has an amazing host and more series coming up. And I'll pop back in too. So with that, Mel, my final question, you know this, I love to ask. What advice would you have given to your younger self?
Yeah, I love that. And I think I would tell myself to stand in my strength sooner. I
Mm,
think especially when you're earlier in your career or even later in your career, and you're often trying to do the best right thing and getting so much feedback from people around you to kind of improve and move forward and grow, which 100%. But if you know what your strength is and you stand in that as your starting place, it just makes it so much easier
mm.
to be great at what you're great at and to learn about what's next. And I'm going to ask you the same question. What advice would you have for your younger self?
Yeah. Uh, I think about look for the opportunity in every opportunity.
Mm,
Uh, I'm a parent of teens. I work with a lot of folks in Gen Z, and like those early stages of your career, I remember I felt like I don't know if I'm on the path of the person, the professional I want to be. And so instead of spending time thinking about that, I eventually learned to look for where I could add value. Like I started in I was office jobs and receptionist in college, and I started learning Illustrator and design on the side to update like all the signs in the office. And so I encourage myself, and I still do this, to just look for the opportunity in your current context because there's stuff there. So yeah, well, I'm going to wrap this up. Again, thank you everyone for joining us. We have been hearing from Melanie Bell-Mayeda, both a former partner and she's a current director of UX and program operations at SearchUX at Google. She's also an instructor, IDEOU's Human-Centered Service Design course. I would love to see all of you keep diving into these topics. We do have a wonderful new program. It's called the Accelerated Change Leadership Certificate Program. It's available on our website, ideou.com. And for those of you who may be new to us, we are running a limited time free gift with purchase. You will get access to our AI and design thinking certificate, our AI and design thinking self-paced course with purchase of any cohort. So with that, let's all go embrace some chaos, hopefully with a little more I hopefully will feel a bit more equipped to do so. Um, and again, thank you, Mel, for bringing all your wisdom to us. And thank you for those of you joining today.
yeah,
Until
thank
next
you,
time.
Co.
Mhm. Bye.
Bye.